Hey guys, Ashish here, back again with my third episode of the Modern Measurements podcast. It's been an amazing. We had a chat with Ben Dutter from Power Digital. In the first episode, we touched a lot about how, with this whole cookieless approach, how things are changing performance marketing world. Last episode, hardware. John is speaking a lot about why predictive analytics should be done by tech, not humans anymore. Today, I have with me Todd. Right, so Todd pretty much has been in the media buying performance space for quite some time, pretty much 2 decades. He spent his work all along dealing with $1 million budgets, and I'm sure there's tons of value that we're going to derive today. So let's get right into it. Todd, thanks so much for coming in. Let's get to know a bit more about you and your journey, and let people know you first.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to chat with you today. You mentioned, having my long tenure in the business. I think I've touched basically every side of the business at this point. And I also have the rare distinction of working in digital marketing, digital advertising for over 20 years, and also having degrees in meteorology. So I started my career getting a degree in meteorology. Knew from an early age that I wanted to study meteorology, weather, etc., and got to do just that. Actually, really applied meteorology, starting my media career with the Weather Channel and weather.com. So I was on the publisher side at that point, managing. I was the editorial director of weather.com for many years, and essentially found that we had a huge audience that would come to the site for seconds every day and then leave in a hurry. And as you can imagine, visiting the site for a few seconds, it looks good in some metrics, in some vanity metrics, but push comes to shove, visiting for a few seconds each day doesn't necessarily pay the bills. So I started spending quite a bit of time with our sales team and with our ad sales operations, and really started to enjoy that, and ended up moving from the Weather Channel over to Discovery Channel to play a role essentially in ad sales marketing. So got a taste of the business side at the Weather Channel, moved over and did more of that for Discovery and Discovery Digital, and was there for quite a number of years as well. And so from the publisher side to the sales side, and then most people, what I had found is that most people in sales and ad sales started their career at some form of agency. So typically you started low level at an agency, do that for a couple, 3-4 years, and then follow the money to the sales side. So I was on the sales side, having never worked at an agency. So I had an opportunity to move from Chicago to LA and work for an agency that I was very familiar with, and so made the move to the planning and buying side of the house, specifically for digital planning and buying. And it's been a big part of what I've done since then. So one of the things that I think is that could be interesting, that'll come up here, I'm sure, is that along the way, after now in my 24th year in digital marketing, digital media, when you've been this long in this industry, it's only natural to kind of steer toward teaching. And so I have been doing a bit of that as well. So I'm a professor of digital and social media at USC, University of Southern California, here in LA, and teaching graduate students all of everything from digital media management to social media, how algorithms work, and kind of everything in between, which is a whole lot of fun to teach 22-year-olds how social media works, as you can imagine.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Let's head back. Right. So because I'm very curious to know about this. So when you were working in the weather space, predictions as a concept is something that weather channels came about as pretty much the first shot in the world, right? Because
Right.
everyone wanted to know about, how's the weather? Because, hey, you want to travel somewhere, you want to know, and we even do that right now. And this has been the common thing that people have been doing for decades. Now, what did weather channels do to really predict the weather? I really want to know, like, how did they start doing that in the initial days?
Yeah. Well, it's actually very interesting, and I would say this is tied to my time at the Weather Channel, but also just in school as well. It's incredibly complicated forecasting the weather. I know people who provide weather forecasts get somewhat of a bad rap. People say they get paid 100% for being 50% correct, things like that.
Right.
And that the reality is that's really not true. They're right far more often than they are wrong. But it is extremely complicated. The atmosphere is not two-dimensional; it's three-dimensional, and so it's this unbelievable situation of trying to model three-dimensional fluid, essentially, that is the atmosphere. And it's very challenging indeed. So one of the things that I think is key to their forecast and any weather forecast is that unlike a lot of what we do in marketing, the weather has been observed for hundreds of years. And so in individual data points for all over the world for hundreds of years, and that's only improving. That we're getting more and more ways of observing, whether it's from satellite or from buoys over in the ocean, or everything in between. And so, with all of that data, understanding what is currently happening in one location versus another location, at the ground versus up in the atmosphere, etc., having all of that. Definitely, while it makes it complicated to compile and to manage all that data, it simplifies the process of modeling, because there are much fewer unknowns in weather forecasting, I would argue, than there are in some of the marketing that we do when we lose track of people. Attribution modeling only works to some extent, and we need people to delete a cookie, or now we people cookie deprecation, all these different things. People don't want to be tracked, all that. Whereas with weather, no one says, "Hey, can I collect the temperature at your at your airport today?" Or can we measure the wind speed at this place? That's never asked. It's just done, and it's done at least every hour, 24 hours a day for 365 days a year for hundreds now of years. And so having all of that data, while it becomes a massive challenge, organization challenge and a storage challenge, it is not, at least we've got the data, at least we've got, the insight. So when you make a forecast, you can immediately, you create a model, you can immediately test it and doing a hindcasting. So you could say, all right, now that we think the model works, let's assume the model, give the model everything that we knew about the weather, the current weather a month ago, and see if it can predict ahead and then measure it against what happened. Things like that we just cannot do in marketing. So
I'll get there, because that's where I wanted to start this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. So when it comes to the parameters in marketing, right? So when I think back in the days where I would say the world started off, I think, from print, billboard, out of home, all of that marketing. Marketing was more in the physical world before, right? And then the whole digital boom gave enormous aspect to the table. But I really want to deep dive that when this whole digital space got formed and people started to market, uh, how was the situation back then? Was it more cleaner? Was it more, understood properly? Was it more targeted properly? What did digital advertisers have a better time reaching to people back then than what they are able to do back now? So how have you seen the internet and advertisers' problems either evolve or more troubles came along the way?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think for sure in the early days of digital, we did not know much at all about people. Just to use the Weather Channel as an example on weather.com, one of the things that we relied very heavily on at the time, we didn't call it this, but it was contextual advertising. So because we didn't have, even if there were cookies in the beginning, there really weren't cookies being used, and we didn't have the tools that we have today.
So there's no tracking back then.
Not really, but contextual was an interesting way to think about things. So just as an example, since you mentioned when you talked about the weather, that traveling and you go to get your podcast, one of the things that we would do that, again, we didn't necessarily refer to this as contextual advertising, but if you go, it may still be this way today, but if you were to go to weather.com or the weather app and you put in a city, so if you type in Los Angeles, then what they know about you contextually, and we knew this back then, so we made these decisions, what we would say is, if you type in Los Angeles, you're a traveler. Because contextually, we know you didn't know the zip code. We're telling you enter your zip code or a city. You chose city, which is broader than a zip code. And so the fact that you didn't think to enter your zip code tells us you're probably traveling to that location. You know the zip code. If you want the forecast for your home,
the decisions, this is made by people, I guess, not AI, right? Like you guys were doing this.
It was made on the fly. What we would look at the parameter, that a parameter would be passed through the browser when in the browser, in the link essentially that they would click when they searched Los Angeles, and that would trigger something to say, okay, they typed a city name, give them the weather for the city, and label them a traveler. So then the ads on the page would be about travel. It would be, we could, there would be airlines and other things like that, and things like online travel agents and things like that. So if you type in a zip code, then you live there. And now the context is, the zip code, you must live there, and therefore the ads we can show you are going to be all local, or can be all local. Whether that's a national advertiser with a local message or a local advertiser with a local message, the context was defined by the user by saying, here, I want the weather for my zip code. And now we know you must live there, because otherwise you just wouldn't know that zip code. So we've relied on things like that, and it worked, I think, to some extent. The problem is that to do that every time someone visited particularly with a site like Weather, and know that they land on the page, they see what they want, and they leave so quickly.
It was tough to do dynamic back then.
It's definitely tough to do dynamic, and it's also tough to prove that for an advertiser, particularly brand advertising, that their ad made an impact, because we could show them time spent on the site, and it was seconds. So how much of an impact could they actually make? So back then, that was one of the hardest things, I think, is just the fact that we couldn't prove that it was necessarily working. But we definitely were I would say, early to contextual advertising and to some of the things that we're coming back to now with cookie deprecation.
Right. It's all coming back in a circle, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So when when I think the vastness of Meta came into play, right? We all went crazy. We were like, hey, I can sell my product to pretty much anyone sitting anywhere. I know what they like. I know what their age is. There's a lot of parameters I know. And the more data Meta knows, better for the advertiser. And it just got better. And even now, it's pretty cool. It still is pretty much the top platform for a lot of folks to target. How have you seen meta advertising changing over the past few years, especially because while it is still giving a lot of results, there's a lot of chatter always about attribution, the numbers, the measurement of it, the need for meta to be improved upon through using conversion APIs, pretty much sending in more data so that, hey, your meta could learn better of your customers, and then it can help you achieve a better ROAS, right? So, when so my question was in terms of like the difficulties and the challenges that which people face as advertisers over the course of years in Meta, and do you see it as evolved? Do you see Meta is still better when it comes to not just targeting but also measurement? What's your view on that?
Yeah. So I think about Meta. It's almost like they've had, I don't know. I kind of think of them as almost like three phases or three cycles or stages rather of life when it comes to advertising with Meta. The first one, they weren't even called Meta. It was really mostly Facebook, and then again, then the addition of Instagram. But it was the sort of the heyday, because they started with, by saying we're going to keep track of every action that you take, everything you like, every person, every place you go, every type of activity you share. And so it was, the beauty of it was people, they really just paid attention to what people did on their platform. And so when, as an advertiser, we went to use Meta or Facebook really at the time, to buy ads through Facebook, they had all of these options, and they got so much more granular than anything that we had access to before. I mean, there were a lot of complaints about, oh, they're a walled garden, so we can't track as well as we'd like to in the bounds of other things that we're doing from a campaign. But they knew their audience better than anyone, because their audience would kept sharing more and more and more, and they just paid attention. Now, obviously, it's not people paying attention. Their systems paid close attention, kept a record of everything you did in a logged in state. And so cookies didn't matter. And made it available to advertisers to target off of. So that's the first phase. And it was fantastic, really unmatched. And then they in fact improved upon it by going to publishers and saying, hey, if you let us pixel your site, then you'll have even more information. So now when people come to your site and then they're back on our site, you'll be able to target people when you're on Facebook that have been to your site. And then they pixeled every site on the web, basically. And now it became this ability to say, not only can you target people who went to your site, but you can target people who went to your competitor's site and change the message. And I mean, again, just a really unmatched ability to target everything. So that was basically phase one, and it was amazing. Whether you liked it or not, it just worked. Phase two was driven by Apple. So 2021, when iOS 14.5 came out, the app tracking transparency rollout, essentially it pushed people. Now anyone who has an iPhone knows about this very well, because as soon as you get an app now, you have to be asked the question of, is it okay if we allow you to be tracked? And a large percentage of people said no. And so a big chunk of that targeting ability went away. Nothing that people were doing on Facebook and we were targeting based on what they did on Facebook, that didn't have to go away as long as it happened in the platform. But all those other things that we got used to being able to target, all the, they went to my competitor's site or my site, or that all went away. And it happened pretty quickly. There was like rumblings that it was going to happen, and then it rolled out, and the only thing slowing it down was the adoption of iOS 14.5 and people upgrading their operating system. And once they did, that's when things took a turn. It just so happens that turn coincided with the rise and the really coming on of TikTok. So what we found is, if the advertising wasn't quite working as well as it had because we were so addicted to all these different targeting capabilities of Facebook. So what a great opportunity to trim our Facebook budget, because we're looking for some money to test on other platforms like TikTok anyway. So we could take some of that Facebook budget and put it over on TikTok as a test. And we won't take enough to damage the Facebook campaign, but it's not working as well anyway. We lost, not only did we lose with that change the ability to target, but we also lost the ability to really measure the impact of our Facebook ads as clearly as we were. So that loss of signal, loss of attribution. So that was phase 2, and they lost their budgets quite a bit and pivoted. You saw that obviously that's when they were renamed to Meta, and it was a little bit of strange times there. And then last year was when we started phase 3, and in this, or stage 3, phase 3, whatever. And that's when essentially Meta used the power of all that data and AI and their algorithm, and developed, improved their targeting without having to worry about cookies and without having to worry about app tracking transparency, and without pixeling the internet. They improved their targeting just based on what they knew of people on their platforms. Their platforms happened to reach billions of people. So between Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, there was a Messenger. They knew everything about all those people, and they didn't need to go really beyond those platforms. So their targeting improved, and then they tackled the topic of attribution. And I would argue at this point, the ads that we run work as well or better than they have, than they did before in phase 1, if you will, or stage 1 of their existence. And the attribution modeling through their machine learning seems to be seems to have rebounded and caught all the way back up. So really impressive. I mean, there's really no again, it doesn't really matter if you like it or not. It just works. And so when something like that just works, that you'd sort of been these swings in momentum. Everything was there going their way. Then there was a momentum, and it was easy to say, let's pull a little budget, put it toward TikTok. And now no one's going to complain if you go to a client and say, I'm going to spend some money on advertising on Meta. Well, okay, it's going to work. So go ahead and do it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Thanks for giving that, snapshot. I think that's going to help. While this game is happening, right? We in LifeSite, we pretty much work with e-commerce, retail, fintech apps, and all these. And you're seeing this one common thing that as media channels increase, data flow increases. Existing data analytics tools really don't cut it for these teams as they grow. They'll need to build their own infrastructures, data teams, data science teams, blah, blah, goes on. And then what really becomes an issue is the data sanctity, the authenticity, the source of it, the ability to real time send that to all of the channels where customers are getting targeted. And I think everybody is moving towards a centralized data play in whether you like it or not, right? And it's getting more important for even advertisers to realize that that is more important for them to really get more revenue along with what they do. And you've been in this game as well, especially in during your stint in Essence, since you've done strategy of data intelligence. So, where do you see, uh, with respect to this entire data stack, data infrastructure, how how are really big, enterprise teams handling this? Do you feel there is a huge gap with respect to how are they doing this, and it's affecting a lot of wastage of money, right, when it comes to spending on ads, because data is important to give that signals for you to know when not to waste, or until when should you run the ad, right?
Yep.
It's so important, and this is not a straightforward answer at all.
So, I think I would start by saying the one easy way to think about it is if you can't count it, it doesn't count. And realistically, it's tough. It's hard to count. And I think to some extent, the promise of digital, of you can track everything and you can see everything, that promise didn't necessarily pan out quite the way. I mean, in reality, compared to the way that was sold through, we can track everything. Yes, you can track everything, but it's a lot of measuring activity versus impact. And we can track the activity all day, all night. Every campaign activity is covered. We have it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we understand the impact. And to your point about maybe more of a unified stack, analytics stack, if you will, the challenge is that we went through this. In the beginning, we used to complain that Facebook was a walled garden, or one or two platforms were walled gardens. Now everything is a walled garden. Every streaming platform is its own walled garden. Every social media, every social network, every social platform is its own walled garden. Everything is a walled garden. So you have to centralize somewhere, because you're going to be pulling. We're getting signals and metrics from essentially every different source, as opposed to the good old days of just a regular buying on the open web and seeing everything in some unified way. We're doing less and less of that, and with cookies again going away, we'll do even less of that. And so now it's about keeping track of what you did over here and over here and over here, and not just the activity, but what was the impact of each of those things. And if you don't have that unified stack, bringing that all together to come up with some sort of ROAS estimate or measurement is almost impossible. So I think,
then how do you end up understand customer behaviors in this case? Because how do you put a behavior to a segment? How do you know that this segment we need to run this kind of an ad? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it is extremely challenging at this point. I think first and foremost, you kind of have to back it all the way up. Like, do we understand what's the objective of this campaign? That's the other thing about this, is that for every campaign, the how has to change with the what and the why. So you start with the why. Why are we even doing this campaign? Well, we're doing this campaign to if you're doing this campaign to drive sales of some e-commerce product, well, then then how we measure that, if that's your why, then what we do is going to be very specific to that, and how we measure success is going to have to be specific to that exact objective. And so that's the first thing, is we have to be able to say, all right, what is the objective? And for each of the different objectives, hopefully at that point, if it's a brand campaign, then we have some methodology where we can try to do some, whether it's multi-touch attribution, or really that would be more of some sort of unified brand study, then that's one thing we can do. So run the same, ask the same questions using the same methodology across each of the different platforms, and have some way to bring it all together into one holistic view. So that's at the brand level. At the mid-funnel consideration level, well, that's where things start to get a little bit muddy. And in fact, that's I would argue one of the most complicated areas to measure that ROI, because at the lower funnel, very transactional, and we can, at least the hope is that you can measure directly, attribute some spend to a transaction, a sale, or some conversion, however you define conversion. But that middle area where, maybe it's product awareness, or as opposed to, it's not brand awareness, it's product awareness, and trying to just move people down a little bit into consideration, it's extremely challenging to measure. And I would argue that I don't think that we've cracked the code, just especially given the dynamic nature of measurement tools, and regulation, and whether it's regulated by the companies like Google and cookies, or Apple and their inability, our ability to not track really much going on there. That's some form of regulation, or it's regulation from the government and not being able to target certain things, and that's an interesting challenge. So that muddy sort of middle funnel ROI is something that I still think has not been figured out, at least not in a way that is very satisfying. I think that's why I feel like we're starting to see far more campaigns that are either way up in upper funnel, mass awareness type campaigns like a Super Bowl on Sunday, or lower funnel, transactional campaigns, retail media, things like that, buying Amazon and that kind of thing. And then that middle part is just kind of washed out, and people are trying to use channels like CTV to sell things. And so it's all kind of blurring together. And I think a big part of that is because that middle funnel is almost impossible to measure accurately. So yeah, I don't think I have a right answer, and you're right. It's not, you said it's a complicated question.
Yeah. No, I mean,
but it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty hard. Like God time. Yeah. Old age statistical models coming back again. Facebook is using back again based on Robin, marketing mix models. All of this was set up so much back then, right? And now we're seeing a renaissance back again, and I feel the only reason this is all coming back is because in the end, people are realizing that the more data collection is more important for us, and prediction is more important for us through that. And we need to really understand our models a little bit better. It's all coming back to the weather analogy, right? But in here, as we spoke, while there are business factors to consider, there are also external factors, right? Like especially since we deal with e-com, there's seasonality, there's product comparisons, prices, and holiday season, and competition, and any sort of like bigger bids during high times. So there's so much for people to deal with, and we're seeing that more advertisers are getting into is the mindset of testing a lot more now than they used to do before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you believe it's the same case? And do you feel that everything is coming back into a circle for a reason? Is it good? Is it bad? Where are we going with this?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I would say let me start by is it good? Is it bad? I mean, I don't think it's bad. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
what you described is necessarily bad. I think that um, I, I love the idea of, there are a million ways to say this, but what got us here won't get us there.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, what worked 2 years ago won't work this year. Whether that's the creative you ran, the channels you ran on, the way you measured success, none of those things necessarily carry over year to year, which makes it
Right.
really challenging and makes you think that you have to sort of continuously adapt and optimize. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, but you can't really do that without accurate measurement. And so I think we're in a period now where measurement is improving in some instances, and you're right, it is a little bit like weather and weather forecasting, in
Mm-hmm.
that in the old days of weather forecasting, it was only as valid as the data that you had available and to
Mm-hmm.
compare it to, and we didn't necessarily have this, even the storage capacity, let alone the collection capabilities to kind of house all that
Yeah.
data to improve the
Yeah.
model. Well, the same thing is true here now. Not that we don't have enormous amounts of data tied to digital marketing, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't necessarily have access to all of it at the same time. And what
Mm-hmm.
we do have is sort of flows in and out, whether again at the whim of Apple or Google or a regulator, or who knows. So you kind of have to account for that happening, and then you plug AI into the mix,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody seems to have some AI strategy or solution,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's one of those situations where if we don't test, if we don't continually look at
Mm-hmm.
what's new and what's next,
Mm-hmm.
uh, then we put ourselves at risk, because again, what
Yeah.
got you there won't get you here. Uh,
Right.
One thing I do think is that having a framework for the tests is very
Mm-hmm.
important. So I do like, I've worked with a couple of very big brands, and they both had similar frameworks, which is encouraging. The numbers were slightly different. So whether that's some sort of like 75-25 split or a 70-20-10 split, the idea being it's 70 or 75% of your budget goes to tried and true tactics, platforms, partners that just seem to work day in and day out. Maybe that's Meta, Google, etc. And then, whether it's 25% is for testing, or you split it into 20 and 10,
Mm-hmm.
that there's some, let's say that the 70-20-10, that 20% would go toward calculated risks. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not, it's not crazy ideas, but they're a little bit riskier than what will just work every time. So maybe it'll
Mm-hmm.
work, you think it'll work. You may have tested it before, so you put 20% of your budget toward these calculated risks. And then that 10%, you don't know. And that
Mm-hmm.
should be okay. And if that
Mm-hmm.
10% falls flat, then it was 10%. And that's within
Mm-hmm.
our traditional, um,
Mm-hmm.
error bounds on, in
Yeah.
terms of discrepancy, in terms of digital media, where 10% is the discrepancy range anyway. So it's
Yeah.
probably okay. So I think
Yeah.
having a framework like that for testing and for
Mm-hmm.
trying the new things, and it really can work for everything. I was
Mm-hmm.
describing this actually to my team in the past couple of months. The idea of 70-20-10 not just being for ad budgets, but for all budgets. So whether that's budgeting of your time, or budgeting of resources like people and teams and team activities, or it could just be literal, the literal budget. Having that framework, it gives you a little bit of comfort. One of the things I've pushed really hard for of late is the more structure you can put around just put some bounds around what you're trying to accomplish, the more free flowing it can be within that structure. So with the same thing with our social strategy, one of the team that I work with now, we put a pretty specific social strategy in place, but that social strategy allows for all kinds of movement and flexibility within it, as long as we're staying, within these bounds of a strategy. And it's somewhat comforting to versus, just saying, what, social is the Wild West and it's free form to just try everything and you never know what might happen. Just putting a little bit of bounds around it, just like that 70-20, a little bit of a framework around your testing can go a long, long way, because it gives you a little bit of comfort to say, okay, if that didn't work, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of our year. It's not the end of the quarter. It was only 10% or 20%.
You're trying to reduce that margin of error, or
right.
That's important. Okay. Now, when it comes to I've been digging into this, like more media networks are coming in, like CTV is one of example, retail media is one of example. Even out of home, I'm seeing a lot of places out, even physically, getting converted into ad placements, and networks are getting formed. Even we'll see a world where even physical assets will be more, and that will be coming on a cloud, and that will be available for media buying and all of that, because we'll look at a connected. We'll finally look at the world as a connected world rather than a siloed digital and a physical world, right? So but I think this is going to take some time to really get there, and for advertisers to realize, to stitch up even experiences which are along the way. But when this happens, I fear that until this is digitized, measurability still will be a problem when we pave along this way. And then what will happen is, even though this entire dream of brand and performance should be again looked at in a very balanced manner, but hasn't been in the marketing world at all. But we're seeing little bit signs of that, where both brand teams and performance teams are really gunning towards their own campaigns. And some of the medias would be owned and prioritized from the brand team compared to the performance team. But in the end, when it comes down to the CMO or the CFO or the agency or whoever it is, right, doing this, they'll be in trouble more, right?
Yes.
When it comes to showing that ROI, it's just a hunch. It's just a very, strong hunch. But how does one go about tackling or being aware of some of the things that they need to do along this way?
So, good question. The first thing I would say is I love the idea and what we're seeing in terms of sort of everything becoming digitized. I love the thought of buying, being able to buy a network of billboards along the freeway here, or the screens in the shopping mall, and knowing that, or that sort of thing. I love the idea of it for sure. And I do think that contextual targeting can go a long way. If I could change the message on a billboard, old school, it takes a long time. People had to physically get up there and put canvas up and paint the bill, or
Yeah,
up
yeah.
the billboard and that sort of
No,
thing. And
yeah.
yeah, so you couldn't really do much in the way of changing the message. It was sort of put it up there and trust that eventually people will see it. But now, you could easily change the message based on the weather, based on the time of day, based on the traffic, based on any number of factors, based on the allergy level, whether it's a holiday, all kinds of things could go into what your message says that should make it resonate more with consumers. But none of those changes, none of that targeting, none of that improved contextual approach to messaging for a digital billboard is going to tell you whether or not it worked. So you still, you could put a QR code up there, but realistically, you don't want a big QR code on a billboard on the highway because you don't want people taking their phone out while they're driving.
Yeah.
So it's almost irresponsible and really wouldn't work anyway. So I still think we run into the same problem.
It would be tough to retarget them as well. Right?
It would be impossible to know that someone. Now, I understand the idea of some. If you really get into the down into it with things like geofencing and other things like that. Well, okay, now we know this person drove within a certain distance of this billboard or whatever. Then maybe we know a little bit more about them. We can serve them, give them a message at that point, but also later. I see that. I think that's interesting and somewhat exciting. But I also see and I'm sure you hear it too, a very clear pushback from consumers who don't want you to know that they drove within a certain distance of some sign, or if they do care, maybe they don't care that you knew they drove there, but they don't want to find out that you knew and that you kept track of it for 30 days or 90 days or whatever. So it is both exciting, and yet at the same time it goes back to the whole idea of just because you can track it doesn't mean that you can measure it, and if you can't, or count it, and if you can't count it, it doesn't necessarily
count.
There you go.
Okay, awesome. Todd, this has been amazing. I think we went a roller coaster already. Hey, I love this chat. Thank you so much for joining in. Folks, hope you got a complete spectrum of how we're seeing the world out there changing. Make sure you get all the tips that Todd gave today. And hey, we're going through a shift as advertisers, but it's a good shift. Me and Todd are there to help you out in any way, fashion. Please reach out to him on LinkedIn if you want to chat with him. And thank you so much for joining into the Modern Measurements podcast. And let's get this going. Thank you so much, Todd.
Yeah, thank you. Great chat.